Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third and final webinar in the psychological safety series called Creating Inclusive and Safe Built Environments. My name is Max, and I will be your moderator today, along with Candace, who will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, you can either message me directly by selecting the host and panelist option in the chat, or message in the general chat. This way, Candace will be able to see your question and address it. To start off, today's webinar is hosted by RJC and Team Synergy Global Consulting. And on the agenda for today, we have land acknowledgement. Then we'll move on to the key portion of the webinar led by our speaker, Audrey. And finally, we will conclude with a 30-minute Q&A portion. In recognition of those who walked this land before us, we would like to begin by acknowledging the indigenous peoples of all the lands we are on today. While we all gather on a virtual platform, it is important that we take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands, which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improve our own understanding of local indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast, continent to continent, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, Aboriginal, and First Nations people that call this land home. We acknowledge with regret that in the past we have not lived in harmony with the indigenous people, and our relationship has not been one of true friendship based on honesty, generosity, and mutual respect. Let us all reflect and acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and to consider how we are and can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. We would also like to acknowledge that this webinar is being facilitated virtually on the ancestral territory of Anishinaabeg nations, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi, who collectively are known as the Three Fires Confederacy. We remember too the people of Wendat, who once made this land their home. Team Synergy Global Consulting and RJC Global Impact are committed to working in partnership with our indigenous peoples to restore wealth, health, and prosperity for those before us and proactively create equality for the people of tomorrow. We must protect the forests for our children, grandchildren, and children yet to be born. We must protect the forests for those who can't speak for themselves, such as the birds, animals, fish, and trees.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again. And I'm excited that we are at our last webinar in our part 1 series. Not excited because I don't have to do this again, because I will be doing this again for a part 2. But I'm excited because there are so many of you that are on this webinar today, or have participated in part 1 and part 2 live, or have watched the recording. And you've already began to implement many of the things that you've learned. And most of all, this webinar so far have been able to contribute to you and your leadership, your strategies, your action planning, in closing those gaps of understanding so that you can begin meaningful and measurable work. And I love the stories you've been sharing with me. So many of you have been talking to me about what are some of the new things you've been starting and the kind of impacts that have been coming from it. And I really welcome those emails and I appreciate you. I want to welcome everyone from many parts of the world, and also for a few groups that are all in a conference room right now. There's many of you sitting around a table, and after these webinars, you use them as a structure to debrief on your own findings of your organization. So thank you. I value you. And let's get started. Okay, so today we're really focused on psychological safety and creating inclusive, safe, built environments. So as you participate today, Again, if you weren't on my first two webinars, I really like to create an experience of how do people participate. And the most important thing to do is participate in a way with curiosity. Be responsible for how you're hearing things. Many times we can be someone that has had so much field experience, work experience, that we sometimes cut off the actual opportunity to learn. So, this is an opportunity for you to discover something new and then put it into practice after the webinar is completed. So, we're inviting you not to assume anything, get interested, discover what might be missing. After this webinar, look at what could be possible within your own current office spaces, from your sanitation facilities, spaces for wellness and creativity that are inviting and inclusive for everyone. Be open, curious, and responsible. And as we move through the discussion, create a follow-up list, things to inquire about. And then please, most importantly, as we go through this, please write down any questions. So today, the webinar is focused on four key areas, primarily in the two top spaces. First, your physical, cultural, and inclusive design, and the impact on workforce diversity and morale. Two, importance of inclusive design in operational efficiency and worker well-being. And then three, the implications of inclusive design on environmental and social governance criteria. And then why conducting an inclusive facilities assessment is foundational step in fostering a culture of inclusion and psychological safety. So we're going to be going through right now, we're going to have many polls, actually 4 polls during the webinar. So this is your first one. In your opinion, what is the biggest challenge in creating a positive physical environment that supports cultural inclusivity, workforce diversity, and morale? A, integrating diverse gender and cultural elements into the physical workspace to promote inclusivity. B, designing spaces that foster collaboration and engagement among a diverse workforce. C, addressing the psychological needs of employees through the physical environment to support mental health and well-being. Or D, ensuring the physical environment adheres to health and safety standards while accommodating diverse needs.
So, in your opinion, what is the biggest challenge in creating a positive physical environment that supports cultural inclusivity, workforce diversity, morale, and the following key areas? The first option, integrating diverse gender and cultural elements into the physical workspace to promote inclusivity. 26% of people voted for that option. Option number 2, designing spaces that foster collaboration and engagement among a diverse workforce. 14%. Third option, most popular one, addressing the psychological needs of employees through the physical environment to support mental health and well-being. 37%. And finally, the last option, ensuring the physical environment adheres to health and safety standards while accommodating diverse needs. 23%.
Perfect. Okay, so let's really now begin to address some of those responses. I'm going to provide you now with a few stats that I want you to consider, okay? So the Surgeon General announced that toxic workplaces are the top 5 health crises. 40% of workers are experiencing workplace anxiety, and 65% say it has been triggered just by going into the office. Why? An occupational health study found that those experiencing continuous psychological distress or mental illness are about 60% more likely to sustain an acute injury than those without. Anxiety, depression have been associated with an increased risk of falls, depressive symptoms, been associated with an increased risk of injuries overall. Organizations must prioritize workplace physical safety and psychological safety. People cannot perform well at work if they feel physically or psychologically unsafe. This is something that the US General has really been focusing on within organizations in the United States. The World Health Organization states that defines that health as is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. As with all injuries, a substantial share of those that occur on the job can be prevented. There is no health without mental health. There is an emerging legal climate that has signaled a duty for employees to ensure that the workplace leads to no serious and lasting harm to employee mental health. By definition, a psychologically safe workplace is one that permits no harm to mental health through negligence, recklessness, or intention. And that's the Canadian Mental Health Association for Workplace Safety. Okay, so how do we now connect all of that? So let's begin by recreating for everybody what really psychological safety is. So psychological safety is a practical behavior concept that is recognized as a critical need of human interaction and human social systems. It refers to creating an environment that occurs to a person as safe, and not as a concept, but as a lived experience. So each one of us have a world personal view. We have these personal views that actually create our occurring world. And that occurring world contributes to our existing lived experience that's right in front of us in that very moment. Our personal worldview is a set of beliefs about aspects of our current reality that ground and influence our perceiving, thinking, knowing, and doing. So, why does this matter when it comes to our physical built environments? Well, all of our human interaction happens within physical human social systems. Our social identity and our personal identity are two ways that people see us. But what's important to understand is that identity sometimes or most of the time is represented in our physical experiences. There are times where if you look back and you walk into a room, a new building, somewhere you've never been, somebody's home, and you go, wow, this feels so good here. I feel relaxed here. There's something that connects you to that physical environment. But then there are times you can walk into a physical space and have an experience of, oh no, this just doesn't feel right. You don't know what it is, but your brain tells you, this is not for me. This does not feel right. I'm not connected to this space. So to ignore either of these things would make trust, communication, and the feeling of being safe very difficult for a workplace. The integrity of an environment can shape how we feel, experience ourselves, experience a workplace within that human social system. And when we experience being excluded due to not having our fundamental needs met, it is like a personal loss and an attack, and we do not feel psychologically safe. So, when I talk about fundamental needs, there's so many people on this call that some of our organizations, our buildings, our sites, our factories, our infrastructures were built many, many years ago. We didn't have the accessibility or the world understanding today that we need to design spaces that everybody feels they're part of. So there's a lot of infrastructure that's built out there today, specifically in the resource industry, that were not even made for all genders. They were made primarily in a man's world, in a working man's world. And so when we look at many of our organizations today that want to bring that diversity into our workforce, yet let's say a woman walks in and she doesn't have her fundamental needs met, it's like that's a personal loss. That's a personal attack. That really has that person not feel psychologically safe to be a woman in that physical built environment. And that's just one example. Okay, so if we take our personal worldview, if we take our lived experiences in that human social system, which is your work environment, we're already in that environment having specific occurrences of ourselves. That's our identity. Okay. Our occurrence of ourselves is how we identify with anything and everything. But there's also an aspect of an occurrence of ourselves within a physical space. Okay. For example, if facilities do not meet my fundamental needs, if there is no cultural aspects that I can relate to, that symbolizes me in that space, my culture, my community, I am not going to feel included. So when we look at our entire worldview, we look at our cultures at work. So many industries already have automatic hazards by default. There are so many industries, mining specifically, manufacturing, mining, resources. There is non-negotiable. And what I mean by non-negotiable hazards is because many of those hazards at times are just our climate, our physical environment. We can't change those things. But there are hazards and preventable ways to manage certain things and the experience that someone would have in those conditions. But along with your normal state and condition as a human being, when you're at work, there comes all these hazards, right? So I want you to imagine all these hazards are all processed very quickly, like almost like a computer system. These experiences, these hazards, the way things occur to us, the way something looks, the way something feels, our sensory around the space prompts and triggers our brain. And that brain begins to process a confirmed evaluation about our personal experience in that space at that time. Now, what happens is we now have an accumulation of all these sensory experiences that are happening in our physical environment. And now we come to the conclusion that something may not be safe for us. So, all these experiences around us, from the bathroom to camps, to lack of signage, lack of lighting, not enough light, not enough natural light, no spaces for me to pray in or take a break in or have a private conversation in where nobody in my working environment can hear me. All of that is being processed automatically like that. And most of us don't even know that that's happening. But what happens is we know something doesn't work for us because we begin to have a ontological reaction. We began to manifest something in our physical selves. Physiologically, we react to our environment. So the brain is programmed to always look for threats. That's the first thing to remember. How many of you know people, or you characterize certain personalities where they find wrong in everything? They judge everything. They see everything. They pick everything. That person sensory awareness is more on a automatic pilot than maybe some other people. But the way they react to those threats is they're vocal about it. Sometimes vocal is good. Why? Because at least you know what you're dealing with. But what we're dealing with in so many of our organizations today is the epidemic of silence. Why? Because as people process those hazards, they experience them as an automatic threat. And what we identify automatically creates a sense of security or a sense of fear. And this is why, automatically by default, our physical environments, the way they're built, they're designed, they're structured, and more than anything, and more importantly, when within the fiber of the design, inclusion is considered, mindfulness is considered, you now begin to awaken something in people where they are like, wow, they thought of that. Wow, they thought of me. And this is what begins to connect people. So, inclusive design empowers diversity. People feel considered and included and a sense of belonging. So many of you who are on the call that you work in the DE&I space, the safety space, the HR space, leadership space, this is a real way for you to connect the dots. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a strategic practice, a principle, a philosophy. It's designed with the intention on how do we really foster a culture of belonging. People feel, yes, I'm going to spend so much time at work every day of my life, time away from my family. I get to walk into this physical space, and it almost is like my second home. Why? Because my fundamental needs were taken care of. So when people affirm to themselves, I belong, meaning people literally will say this to themselves. They'll say, I belong, or they're going to say, I don't belong here. So if they are saying, I belong, they feel psychologically safe, creating that sense of security. When you have that, people process information in a very different way. It impacts them cognitively. Okay. So perceived threats begin to look like perceived challenges. And when there's a challenge, people's critical thinking, strategic thinking, conflict resolution has an opportunity to rise up and now begin the dominating behavior that will begin to lead the work. So, this sense of security can have an absolutely profound effect on a human being's cognitive functioning. So, when you have an inclusively built environments, that are psychologically safe, you create security, you create that protection. By doing that, people are more open and willing to the experience of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And by default, that actually creates diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforces. And from there, people have the personal lived experience of dignity, respect, and they're being valued. That is what creates belonging. And from there, you'll be very effective or more effective at workforce diversity and workforce morale. So we're now going to do our second survey. In your opinion, what is the biggest challenge in creating a positive, physically designed environment that supports operational efficiency and worker well-being, particularly in terms of inclusive design? A, implementing inclusive sanitation facilities and designs that accommodate all genders and needs, enhancing accessibility to ensure that all employees, regardless of ability, can navigate and use the workspace effectively. C, reducing work-related injuries through ergonomic design in workspaces. D, improving employee health by incorporating wellness, lifestyle facilities, and spaces for de-stressing. Okay, so B, enhancing accessibility to ensure that all employees, regardless of ability, can navigate and use the workspace effectively. That was the most popular one. So that's 37%. Second was improving employee health by incorporating wellness, lifestyle facilities, and spaces for de-stressing. That was 34%. Next is implementing inclusive sanitation facilities and designs that accommodate all genders and needs, 20%. And last, reducing work-related injuries through ergonomic design and workspaces. That was 9%. Okay, so Max, what I'm going to have everybody do now is we're just going to play a video for you. And what I want you to do is, as you watch this, really connect to your own experiences and the emotion behind it. Okay, so as we move through this next space, you want to really connect the amount of time a human being gives. All of us on this call right now, we give so much of our time in our work environment. And when we leave work, many of us, I mean, in our organization, one of the things we do is we work with people in understanding what they're dealing with in their work environment. We hear it. They bring their work home with them. And then that impacts that environment at home. So many of you may or may not relate to that, or you can relate to it because you've heard it so much from other people. But when we look at the fact that we spend close to 3,000 hours really away from the place that is a sacred place called home, we have a responsibility to create those physical environments where people feel they're valued, respected, and they're included. They may not have the opportunity to do absolutely every single thing because they choose to do it or not to do it, but they need to be given the opportunity regardless, to feel accepted and secure in the spaces that they're in. In our organization, we have a model, and we've talked about this in the first two webinars, called the whole person safety model. And one of the areas that's probably the quickest win when we go into an organization is the built environment safety. So again, the built environment is really the spaces where we work significantly impact our mental state. So a mindfully and inclusively designed, safe, and comfortable physical environment not only prevents physical harm, but also promotes mental clarity and reduces stress, optimizing employee performance. Human-centered and inclusive built environmental design is critical to protect people's psychological health. So you're either protecting psychological health in your physical environment, or you're opening up the door for mental illness. And this is something that many organizations battle with. They're like, okay, if I'm going to invest money somewhere, where is it going to go? We only have so much of a budget. But the fact that it's sometimes looked at as not important, when it could be the quickest turnaround, the quickest win, and the most obvious implementation of an action to move inclusion and psychological safety forward, the fact that it's sometimes there's a blind eye to it is really doing your organization and your workforce an injustice. I personally believe, and so does my team, that the only reason why that occurs is because most people cannot connect the dots. They really do not understand, how does a built environment design impact someone's psychological health. So when we look at a human being and their physical experience, they walk into an environment. These are the factors of how an environment can influence the brain's biology. So the physical aesthetics to be occurring to somebody like meaningful and trusting. People walk into a physical space. Is it meaningful and trusting? Most human beings think that way. People, are they calm and reliable? Culture and values, relatable connections. Do I see something within the physical infrastructure that really represents me? This is a big one when organizations are working and on social performance community engagement initiatives. When they don't integrate into the physical design culture, especially in our First Nation communities, when that's not brought in, but there's an expectation or an intention or an I&D strategy that you want anywhere from 50 to 80% of your workforce coming from the local community, but they cannot have any relatable connection to physical design of a facility, it is a very disrespectful and dishonorable thing to do. And unfortunately, most organizations won't know, because that's part of the silence that's happening out there today. And then our sensory, is it motivating and safe? There's a reason why we have a red light, red flashing light when there's an emergency that we need to attract your attention and stop you. And then there's a reason why there's a yellow and why there's a green. That's the way our brain functions. It works on sensory, okay? And we're trained since we're a little child about all these sensory mechanisms in our physical space. It's how we actually learn. It's how we protect ourselves. And then familiarity, positive environmental association. So if people can't connect, associate with something that's positive, they're going to automatically disconnect by default. And that's just what the brain does. What happens next is we begin to have an internal dialogue. So there is a powerful relationship between environmental design and the experience of dignity. So there's a lot of talk in so many organizations today with certain words: dignity, respect, trust, and belonging. And for many professionals, it's a concept because they don't have the language and the knowing and the how to connect it together and relate it to a personal human experience. So, one of the simplest ways to understand this is when we have a physical experience due to a physical surrounding impact, we have these internal dialogues and they reflect feelings of isolation, marginalization, and insecurity. That fosters into sentiments of exclusion and feeling invisible. So when that happens, we are left with a lack of self security, that sense of security. So a built environment is designed to protect its people from harm and provides a sense of security. It is also protecting one's dignity. If you cannot protect someone's security, you cannot protect their dignity. If you cannot protect their dignity, they do not feel respected. So, feeling safe is a fundamental human need, not just a human right, and the cornerstone of dignified existence. Okay. And the word dignified existence is so important. One of the reasons why we have so many nonprofit organizations around the world going into marginalized communities, going into spaces of extreme poverty, is because people know it in their core. They know it in their spirit that that is not right, that those people, that community deserve to be protected. They need that sense of security. So, with respect, dignity in the workplace is fundamentally about respect and the recognition of everyone's intrinsic value. It relates to how people feel about themselves and how they are perceived by others. When the physical environment does not meet an individual's physio, psychological, and social needs, it can impact their dignity. They are left not valued, and one of the key reasons why people leave their jobs. So, what we're doing here today is giving you language. Okay. We're giving you the language to really understand how to connect those dots from why bathroom facilities, why mothers' rooms, why when you have mine site camps, that it's important that there's no shared sanitization facilities between genders, why privacy, why having certain office space, either too much isolation or too much congestion is not safe for people. So when you look at somebody having 2,000 hours a year of time we spend at work, the psychological science can inform us that how we optimize the workplace in a changing world, from supporting employee well-being to improving employee motivation, job satisfaction, and organizational efficiency. Work is important to our well-being. This is what we have to remember. It's part of our self-expression, in addition to the income it makes. So you're attaching an income, a livelihood. By default, people are always engaging in a conversation in their mind that their livelihood is at risk. Why? Because for them, they may not know if they have job security. Why? Because most of the time they don't have job control. Okay. So when we have an opportunity collectively to really minimize those physical impacts in our environment, we want to be able to delete off the list some of the barriers that we can. So people don't have to think about those things anymore. They're already filled up with the day to day. So our work is our identity. We identify ourselves as the work we do. And that's why building an inclusive, diverse culture really brings that meaningful work, that purposeful organizational mission Okay, where collectively, that's where we're headed in the future. That's where we are now and moving and walking. We're not running yet. We're walking a slow pace towards making that happen. And then creating an environment where everyone feels welcomed and a part of the same community. How many of you ever walked into a home or somebody you just felt like you weren't welcomed? Okay. Your work environment has that same experience, especially for new employees. Okay, next poll. In the context of inclusive, safe design, which aspect do you believe is most critical in creating a positive physical environment that significantly impacts environmental and social governance criteria? So, workforce inclusion, ensuring diverse representation and equitable opportunities within the organization to foster a more inclusive and supportive workplace. B, risk management. Inclusive design helps mitigate the risk of discrimination lawsuits and non-compliance with regulations, thus strengthening the governance aspect of ESG. C, affirmation of community and identity. When heritage is reflected in the built environment, showing the history, culture, and identity of the community, it serves to affirm the dignity of that community's members. And then D, environmental sustainability, incorporating sustainable practices and green spaces into the built environment reflects a commitment to the dignity of the future generations by preserving the environment and resources they will inherit. So as you're participating in the survey and you're making your choices, ESG is a is a very important aspect of an organization. And many people are challenged by, how do we connect diversity, equity, and inclusion? How do we connect environmental sustainability? How do we connect workforce inclusion, risk management, social performance initiatives? How do we connect all that through ESG metrics? Well, first of all, you need to know what you are going to measure. So many of you that may or may not know or are experienced in the ESG space, I'm going to assume most of us are. But when you're looking at ESG, you really are, it's the numbers behind your corporate social responsibility. Key word being responsibility. We have a corporate responsibility to do certain things outside of the profitability of the organization. So ESG is a set of metrics. Now, if you just look at your built environment, there are many aspects that can be integrated into that. So the first one at 34% was workforce inclusion, ensuring diverse representation and equitable opportunities within the organization to foster a more inclusive and supportive workforce. Okay. D, environmental sustainability was 31%. B, risk management was 20%. And C, affirmation of community and identity. So what is interesting about that is if we just take the first one, A, workforce inclusion, ensuring diverse representation and equitable opportunities within the organization, and you look at the question, what aspect do you believe is most critical in impacting ESG criteria? Well, if all we ever focused on for the next 6 months, every organization or a year was workforce inclusion, we almost by default could manage B, C, and D. So strategically, if all we did was ensure diverse representation and equitable opportunities in the way people think, in the way they plan, in the way they act, the way they behave, their emotions, their social systems, their environments. If we only focused on A by default strategically, we would be building in automatically B, C, and D. So ESG and inclusive design. So specifically to social performance, the design of a space can reflect the social identity of its people by recognizing and celebrating their diversity. So if you are on a mission to increase the amount of build a local workforce, or if you're engaging in certain aspects of your treaty agreements, if you're dealing with bringing more of your local workforce into the space and bringing more women into leadership roles or any role into the workforce. If somebody cannot see themselves within that physical space and they are not represented, they will not be recognized by themselves. Therefore, they say to themselves, I don't belong. So environmental psychology tells us that spaces we inhabit can profoundly affect our thoughts, emotions, and our behaviors. Okay. When a workspace is designed with those considerations, those human needs, it really is a non-negotiable expression, a proof, evidence that an organization has a commitment to its employees' well-being. And psychological research into recognition. So recognition isn't just saying to people, you've done great. Recognition also is, we've identified one of your needs, your fundamental needs. And dignity, respect, and belonging is so important to us that we are going to implement that inclusively designed element into our space so that you have your fundamental needs managed. And then non-inclusive environments often fail to consider the cognitive load. So when we're dealing with how much sick leave there is due to mental loss, how many injuries there are due to not being cognitively present, because we're always in a state of stress. When we can develop those types of physical environments, we are now reducing injuries. We are reducing those risks. These can be applied directly to your ESG initiatives. And for many organizations that are looking for budgets, it's a perfect way to connect those dots. So not implementing inclusive design can negatively affect an organization's ESG rating by demonstrating a lack of commitment to social responsibility and employee well-being, potentially leading to reputational damage and financial risks. So again, we look at the social performance in ESG, employee well-being, diversity and inclusion, community relations. These are all things that you can manage through all your psychological safety strategies, okay? And they really do address all of them, especially risk management, not just in injury, but more in the space of or advancing the space of discrimination claims and harassment. So our last poll.
In your opinion, which area of an inclusive facilities assessment would have the most significant positive impact on fostering a culture of inclusion and psychological safety in your current work environment? First option, compliance with legal standards. Ensuring our facilities meet all legal requirements to promote fairness and prevent discrimination. Second option, identification of design barriers to inclusion. Recognizing and addressing physical, social, and systemic design and infrastructure obstacles that hinder full participation for all employees. Next option, enhancing the sanitation infrastructure, creating psychologically safe, mindful, personal care, hygiene, and sanitation facilities. And the last option, prioritizing employee well-being, implementing on-site wellness facilities and spaces that optimize mental health and physical well-being. So the 49% identification of design barriers to inclusion, recognizing and addressing physical, social, and systemic design and infrastructure obstacles that hinder full participation for all employees.
Perfect. Okay, so amazing, 49%. This is why it leads us to this next space. If that really is important, identifying those design barriers, then the first place to start is to assessing it. Okay. Now, a built environment assessment is a key component of responsible organizational management. It's the most important thing to know. You can't lead your organizations, manage your organizations if you're not responsible for being aware of the barriers. Okay. We have an opportunity not to operate blindly. When we refuse or delay or put off or undervalue certain types of assessments, we're basically saying to our workforce, you know what? Those barriers are not that important to us. Because if they were, the organization, the workforce culture, the workforce themselves would be able to experience, wow, you really do want to find the truth. So when we talk about a statement called one source of truth, what we need to get is that right now in every one of our organizations, there's a lot of people with a lot of opinions about what the barriers are and what great looks like, what inclusion looks like. But you need to begin with a baseline. You need to begin with identifying what they are. And as part of our built environment safety, these are some of the aspects that we look at. Okay. And it really impacts everything from compliance, well being, operational efficiency, strategic planning, risk management, and the ESG goals. So, let's do a little, I'm going to do a little start with you about one easy quick win. Okay. So when we go in and we look at the built environment safety, we look at certain things as simple as your bathrooms, your change rooms, your lighting, the way your furniture is positioned. Many of you that have buildings and walls already put up may not have the budget to tear down walls or put them up. But what you do have is the opportunity to take the first step in reorganizing spaces that are considerate. Okay. But there's also certain things that are outside the physical elements that impact and directly contribute why other things are also not working in the organization today. So what I love about bringing this conversation up, and it's not just to focus on women in PPE, but it's a really clear way to understand and connect the dots. So, CSA conducted a research study of 3,000 women across many sectors, okay, mainly male dominant sectors, and their experiences with personal protective equipment in the workplace. 40% of Canadian women have been injured at work due to poorly fitting PPE. Many of us have heard these stories many times. We've seen it, we've experienced it. You know, we've had to make adjustments, tie, tape, belt, do whatever you can, or simply avoid, or simply create our own personal alternative to that safety workwear. But what happens when that outfit, that item that's supposed to keep that person physically feeling safe is on their body, and now they've got to trail across a 15-minute walk, either in the freezing cold or in the desert heat, with in the dark, with no light, no signage, and they're going into a portable bathroom. So that person needs to endure that while they're giving 2,900 or so hours of their life to the company. Okay, so you really want to tie that together, because these are simple little wins that we can all collectively make a difference with, whether it's changing of lighting, whether it's, you know, the signage, that type of thing. One of the things we do when we go into an organization is the first thing we identify are what are the quick wins. So trust, respect, dignity, and belonging. You're looking at 2,946 hours a year spent away from home. You want to be looking at what you can do. So identify those quick wins. We all have the opportunity to examine the role of work in our lives and explore ways to better enable all workers to thrive within the workplace and beyond. So, starting with the things you have control over and you can accomplish relatively easy. So, my quick win to you is number one, look at how you can begin that assessment process. Look at what things right away, knowing what you've learned today, can actually be a way to start implementing right now today within your work environment. Okay, so Max, would you like to begin with the first question?
Totally. So the first question is, how does a company get started? It can occur overwhelming to define the scope. So how does really a company start?
Okay, great question. And thank you for that question. So, how does a company get started? Well, the first thing to do is identify you need to start. Remove from your thinking that there aren't any barriers. Assume they are. So, number one, write down. Assume there are barriers. Number two, begin to look for those barriers that are easily identified. Right? Number three, bring a group together that is sincerely interested and have participation at all work levels. If we are really going to begin to look at this process and begin to identify some of the barriers in the assessment phase, what do we actually need to do? Well, this is a collective conversation. You have to begin looking at who's our workforce. Every workforce is different. Some have a population of 30% women. Some have a population of five. Some have three or four languages within their culture. Some have a workforce that is 70% from their indigenous community. Some have accessibility issues. There are so many needs. You have to get to know your people to know what your people need. And you want to write that down. You got to get to know your people to know what your people need. Okay, so you want to begin there. If you're interested in having an assessment, you can contact us. We do have a process that we follow. This is not something that I'm on here to sell. It's something to provoke you. Whether you do an assessment with us or you create your own, right now in the industry, it's not something that's very popular. It's a very brand new initiative in many ways. It's understood through architecture psychology, environmental psychology. People come in with architecture teams when they're doing new builds. But how do you begin when you have an existing premise, infrastructure? And some of these infrastructures could be anywhere from 20 to 50 years old. Okay. So you want to begin there. Who should own it? Honestly, if it's not owned by the leadership team at the top, nothing is going to get done. It will not be sustainable. The message must be driven by the leadership. I cannot stress this enough. But if you had to choose one person in that leadership team, you want to be identifying that person as someone in safety, someone in HR. If not, they're partnered. They collaborate on this initiative. You cannot have one without the other. I cannot stress this enough. So that is who should be owning this. Okay, next question, Max. I hope that supported you.
Next question is, how much does it cost the company annually with unsafe workforce injuries, resources, and tools for employees?
Wow. Well, if we look at one employee, so if somebody's off ill on an injury, whatever injury it is, mental or physical, that company is going to be spending approximately $47,000. Now I think that's in the Canadian number. But not only are you looking at the cost of lost production, you're looking at the impacts on morale because that person is missing. But then you need to find a replacement. So for some people, it looks like you're going to be bringing in that temporary consultant model into that org position, right? So if you are looking at the cost, I'm going to just invite you to look at the kind of costs it is for your company to hire and train people that are new. Because one of the waves that's going to be coming at us very, very soon is we are going to need so many new people working in our organization. There is going to be a massive competition in the pool talent. So if on one end, you're managing mental health, right? You're managing creating psychologically safe built environments, psychologically safe leadership, psychologically safe behaviors. If you're really looking at or running that organization through the lens of psychological safety, inclusion, diversity, equity, belonging, respect, dignity will be a natural outcome of all of that. So if you're managing that on one end to hold on and empower the people that you already have and minimize those injuries, on the other side of it, you're now working and building a culture where people are going to talk. Your corporate reputation is going to build, and that new workforce coming in is going to be, this is where I belong, right? So you want to look at both sides of the spectrum when it comes to cost. Max, did I answer that? All of that?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's
What's our
so the
next question?
Yeah. As for the next question, how can a company build in this type of assessment into their DI budget?
Oh, so good. Okay. Well, within a diversity, equity, and inclusion budget, there is, depending on what industry you're in, there is a area where your policies, you want to go to look at your policies. Okay, so the first place you want to go look at is policies. Are the policies actionable? If they are, there's aspects in those policies or in your standards that can support you in facilitating what you need to have the budget for an assessment like this be filtered through your diversity, equity, and inclusion. Simplest thing is, if there is, let's say, a one of your metrics, your ESG metrics is increasing your diverse workforce, you want to bring more women into the workforce. Well, right then and there is your diversity, equity, and inclusion budget. By doing an assessment, you'll begin to know what are the barriers in the physical environment that would present a woman feeling safe wanting to work there. Okay. I've had those personal experiences. I've been in camps. I've been in these places in a mine site. I've been in factories. I've worked in all these kinds of spaces where there wasn't a facility for me. And many times it was embarrassing. So there were many times, and there's so many other fellow women I know on this call and in the industry that would just not drink water so that they don't have to go to the bathroom because it's embarrassing to walk to something that everybody can see, go in, go out, and you can barely deal with your PPE getting it on and off, right? And I don't mean to go back to that, but I want you to use that to relate to it, okay? And diversity also in the cultural aspect. Right now, there's 80,000, we're going to be needing it just in the mining industry alone, 80,000 opportunities for employment in Canada alone in the mining sector, the resource sector. So we're competing with other parts of the world moving into our pool talent. but it also means Canada's doing the same. So if you're going to do the same, you also need to begin to integrate into your physical design, which is part of your DE&I budget, things like prayer rooms, things like certain pieces of clothing that are contribute to religious beliefs, cultural beliefs, traditions. There's so many different things that you would need to build into your infrastructure that could easily fit into the DE&I budget. Okay, I hope that answered your question. Max, next one.
Uh, Next question is from Wendy, and it
Okay.
says, can AI and robotic tools that are programmed help reduce high workforce unsafe injuries among workers, or do they simply increase costs?
Wow. Okay. So if I'm going to look at robotics, okay, and specifically if I'm going to use the example of mining. So right now there are, if we look at underground mining, if we look at a warehouse, another industry, like you have warehouse, you supply something to a market, okay? And you've got things that are high up, you've got packaging needs, you've got filling needs, you've got moving boxes needs. But if we go to mining and we look at the underground space, and you were to use something like robotics in that area, remote vehicles going into that area, 100% that is going to support mining. Okay, that's going to support safety. Okay, there's many of these types of robotic machinery that's going to support. Now, this is the thing to remember. Unless you are communicating and creating a physical environment that shows your current workforce that no matter what talks there are about robotics and technology and AI, you are not building into those conversations and those plans that people can see and feel and experience that human inclusion into an AI technology robotic future isn't happening. You're going to begin to bring that insecurity in, that fear, and you're going to lose your workforce. So the way you want to look at it is, what are the things like a hazard, a workforce hazard, that can be completely avoided by a robotic? Okay. But no matter what, most of the time, human beings have some part of facilitating that technology. Okay. So no matter what, if they're not trained, if that environment is not created for them, it's like a remote center, center for a mine site. If they're not built in an inclusively designed way that is healthy for people, then no matter how much somebody's behind that controller, something's going to happen, something's going to be impacted. So, in short, robotics will support safety for sure, extreme hazardous work environments. And at the same time, you need to be responsible for how you create the experience of human inclusion. So I hope that answered your question. Max, next question.
The next question is, what process for gathering employee data, survey, interview, or focus groups would you recommend to best address the needs in safe and inclusive environments?
Okay, very good. So 100%, I'd have to say at the top of my list is a survey. Now, the catch with that is it cannot be a generic survey. So what's important is before you even do a survey, you need to understand the neurological science behind the information you're trying to capture. Okay? It needs to make sense. If you're going to let the data do the talking, and it's really going to be part of your decision-making process, then it needs to be a source of truth. And the only way to get that, and I say this over and over and over again, surveys that are generic are designed for only certain things. But if you need a survey to decide and distinguish barriers, gaps, or anything like that, they need to be customized. The person developing it needs to understand the already existing conditions of the workforce environment, but also have a clear understanding of what kind of change and impact is the organization needing and why. So it's got to tie into certain metrics. So if we work backwards, let's say we want to accomplish a certain ESG metric. Then we work backwards from there. What are our blocks, our barriers from accomplishing that? And then from that, you can really begin to develop a framework of intentional questions so you can extract the right information. So definitely that when we're doing assessments, there's many projects we're working on right now where we design the assessments based on a initial in-person assessment. So it'll look like we go in, we analyze the state and condition in the obvious way. What's right in front of us? What's staring at us in our face? And we take that, we spend time with the leaders, we understand their pain points, and we break down the anatomy of that pain. And then from there, we're able to begin the process of looking in, doing a deeper dive into the information in front of us so that we can develop those survey questions. Okay. And many times, honestly, we are doing focus groups and one-on-one discovery sessions individually with people that we have identified could provide tangible, credible, effective data. What I mean by that is the truth with as minimal bias as possible. Okay? Hope that answered your question. Okay, Max, is there another question?
What can entry-level workers do to instill inclusive environments with peers and higher-ups to demonstrate the necessity of psychological safety if a workplace is in a constant state of high performance with tight deadlines?
Okay, well, what I invite you to do if you haven't is really go watch the second webinar. And why? Because for someone that's new coming into the company, so if you're somebody who's new at the entry level and you are identifying certain things, and one of them is that the space isn't feeling psychologically safe because there's a lot of pressure, there's work demands, people are expected to work beyond hours, there's pressures to meet that next goal, that next milestone, that next target, or else, right? There's, what can somebody do? Well, they can speak up, right? And what I love about this is what I love about even when I'm teaching or doing any kind of work with people is I love entry level students. Why? They're the most curious people. They speak up and they haven't developed those fears yet, those biases, those they haven't adopted some of the toxic culture that's happening. So the first thing that can happen is you speak up or go and read your policies. Okay. Go read if there's a speak up policy. Go read if there's an inclusion policy. Go see if those policies are actionable. And for some companies, those actionable policies will demonstrate that this is our process for sharing something. Okay. But there is no easy way around this. It really takes a lot of confidence and courage to be able to go in and say, listen, I know we're under a lot of pressure here, but some of the things that I'm experiencing and seeing are not really creating a safe environment for people. People are being excluded in some way. And a lot of times, exclusion is happening in people speaking, right? So if we bring it back to the physical environment, this is one of the reasons why how offices are designed are so important because you could have a manager come in and speak to somebody and just say something as simple as, we're behind. When am I going to get it? And they can use that tone and tenor, and everybody else hears it. And right away, it's like cringing. There's fear in the space. Okay. So, one, find a private, confidential place to speak at. I would welcome you, whoever that leader is. You can go to HR, you can go to health and safety, but generally you may want to go to your direct report. Okay. If that person is not able to support you or in what you're looking for, then you go to HR. Okay. All companies either have or should, or if they don't, they don't. But I'm assuming people will have those processes in place so that they can get the support that they need. So, number one, have that transparent communication, speak up, write down write down what it is for you that you're identifying so that you're prepared in your meeting to go address and talk about what you need to talk about. Okay.
I believe that was the last question.
Okay, amazing. So, everyone that's still on the call, there is going to be a couple of other events that I'm going to be participating in. We will be putting a resource link in the chat to a resource page. I will be at PDAC. I will be participating in a panel at PDAC on March 5th. The information's on that page. I'm also next week going to be participating with TSM on a webinar, and the link to register also is for that event. And there's several other things that are going to be happening at PDAC, so go back on the resource page and I'll continuously update that. Okay, thank you everyone. Our next series is going to begin towards the end of April. We will contact you soon. Thank you. Have a safe day, and thank you so much for the commitments you have to the organizations that matter to you. Bye for now. Thank you, Max, and thank you, team.
Presented by RJC Global Impact and Teams Energy Global Consulting. Building the future together.